Hi, I'm Louise, and today I'm going to be ranking Guillermo del Toro's filmography. Guillermo del Toro Gomez, or more colloquially known as Guillermo del Toro, is a fascinating director. He's been directing films since 1993 and has been delivering scares and monster romance ever since. He has such an interesting perspective on horror and the things that scare us and our relationship to them. He also has an ever-growing list of repeating collaborators, which to me indicates their love of working with Del Toro. I wanted to watch through his filmography because I loved his style, the sort of stories he tells, but I also loved his love of monsters. Often the antagonists of his films are not the monsters themselves, but people. I love the way he advocates for other creative people. He is a vehement hater of AI. I love so much of his work, so this is more of a ranking of the heart than my last one. Essentially, all of these films I love to some degree. And this is a vehicle for me to talk about them and sort through how I feel about them. As a filmmaker, he's had an interesting journey to the now beloved Oscar darling that makes kind of spooky films. His first film, Cronos, was independently made in Mexico. From there, he worked shortly with the Weinsteins on an English film called Mimic, which he reportedly hated working on due to their interference. Then moved to make The Devil's Backbone, more similar in scope to Cronos, and also in Spanish again. From there, in the 2000s, he gained more recognition after directing Blade 2, Hellboy 1 and 2. His film Pan's Labyrinth, in my opinion, is really what got him on the map as far as awardsy films go, culminating in 2017 when he won Best Picture and Best Director for The Shape of Water. He has also since won Best Animated Film for Pinocchio. The stories of all of his films have some sort of darkness and sadness, to varying degrees, of course, but they all have some sort of hopefulness to them. He's not a nihilist or a hater of humanity that many might think of the monsters he creates are. He loves people and loves getting to make films that investigate them and their darkest fears. If you can't tell, I adore this man. This was mostly just an excuse for me to peruse his filmography, and I really had a great time. On to the ranking. At the bottom of my ranking is Mimic. I do feel a bit bad putting this at the bottom, but it is definitely not my thing. And sometimes that can be fine if the movie is good, but this is fine. Honestly, if I wasn't doing this ranking, I probably never would have watched this film. The premise of the film is they've created a genetically modified insect to combat a disease that showed up in children at the beginning of the film. Anyway, it does that and then eventually evolves into giant insects that kind of look like people, hence the name Mimic. I think on paper this seems like an interesting idea. The movie also has some really evocative imagery here and there, but it really just doesn't quite come together for me. I wish we got more of the creature design. I feel like we didn't really see it much, which I guess makes it more scary, but it didn't really scare in the way I think it was wanted. The VFX used for some of the bug stuff just kind of looked odd. I mean, this is the 90s, so that's a new thing and everybody's still trying to figure that out, but it just really did not work for me. I also think some of the disparity, at least in the creature, was them trying to balance being this big Hollywood movie but also a horror film. I remember reading somewhere that they were going to do like a scene where you could hear them like repeating back to people what they were saying, and I'm like, that would be way more horrifying than like a face that kind of looks like a person. So I don't know. I just feel like we've seen this concept before and it's been done better before. And basically the whole ending is just them fighting big bugs. It's more of like, it feels more like an action movie ending than a horror movie ending, if that makes sense. So the genres don't quite mesh together all the way. It was fun seeing some people in the cast that I just didn't expect, like Norman Reedus makes an appearance. He doesn't have his, like, normal hair, so I almost didn't recognize him, but you could hear it anyway. But it is him, and it's one of his first film roles. Josh Brolin plays a cop, which I think he does much better in a few other films that I like. F. Murray Abraham also makes an appearance as our lead's mentor and teacher. He's always great. I did love seeing him in this, and honestly, he gave the most engaging performance of the film for me. We also have this movie to thank for the long collaboration of Guillermo del Toro and Doug Jones. This was their first film together, the first of many, and Doug Jones plays one of the bugs. So this is the first of many of these sorts of roles for him, and for him with Guillermo del Toro, and thank goodness, because there's a lot of great ones to come. I do think this is worth checking out if this is your sort of thing, but if the premise doesn't interest you, I'd say this one's a skip. Unless you're like me, trying to be a completionist and finishing all of Guillermo del Toro's filmography. Next on my ranking is Blade 2. Now, I don't think this is a bad movie by any means. I will say, from here on out, the rest of these movies I really enjoyed. Like, I could watch any of them again and have a great time. However, I don't think this is his best. That's why it's here. There are lots of fun things here, though. I think the action is really fun. Wesley Snipes, of course, is great in this. I really love the first Blade, especially that opening nightclub scene. They have a quick callback to that in this film where they go to another vampire nightclub. It just really encapsulates that era of big movie filmmaking that you see in like the Matrix films, where for some reason they were like, everyone needs to be going to the club. That's what we're doing. The club. The club. Anyway, Blade 2 continues the story of Blade, a half-human, half-vampire hybrid who spends his time fighting vampires in what is essentially just the coolest ways possible. This time, he has to join forces with the vampires to fight against a group of mutant vampires who want to eradicate all vampires and humans. I do really like the designs of the mutant vampires. They're called Reapers, and they have this jaw that like splits into two parts. It looks super crazy. I think the idea of Blade teaming up with other vampires is interesting, but I don't think it quite lived up to its potential. I feel like at the end of the movie, Blade really seems the same towards vampires, so I don't really buy him changing at all here. Sure, he like Nisa, I don't know how you say that. Fine. But I don't really feel like they were that close, and it seems like that was more of an exception than the rule. He still doesn't really seem to like vampires. Norman Reedus is also in this movie. He has that, familiar haircut, and he plays a bigger part in this one. And I love that he's been rocking that haircut now for like 25 years. I think that's great. Donnie Yen is also in this, which is really fun. He was the action coordinator. I just was really happy to see him here. I love his work, so it was fun that he was in this. He wasn't a huge part of it. He was part of the vampire crew, but it was fun to see him here. I love how much wrestling was baked into some of the fights. It seemed more of a result of it being made in the early 2000s than Donnie Yen being in charge, but I did think that was kind of funny. And this is the first on this list anyway, starring Ron Perlman, who's just fantastic and shows up in a lot of these films. He has such a great voice. Anyway, he has a crazy haircut in this movie that I feel like I don't really understand why it's like that, but I'm not mad. All in all, I think this is kind of lacking in the character development, which feels a bit weird to be complaining about in a movie like this, but I know that Del Toro can do that in these kinds of movies, and that's why they're higher on the list. Next in my ranking is Hellboy. Again, I feel bad putting this here, but this is by no means a bad movie. I just like other of Del Toro's films better. Hellboy is the first of two Hellboy films Guillermo del Toro directed. After the success of Blade 2, Guillermo got handed this film. Hellboy was also the first live-action Hellboy film and stars our favorite, Ron Perlman. Hellboy is such a fun character. He just gives such a fun performance in this, and Del Toro writes really fun stuff for him. So anyway, they're a great mix together. And we get to see Doug Jones in his first speaking role. He is great as Abe Sapien. Not his last time being a fish man for Guillermo del Toro. His costuming, as well as Perlman's, are absolutely incredible. They're kind of these crazy looking characters, but they're like our leads, so it's really important that they're able to emote and like feel real, and they do such a great job. I don't know what they did, but they all looked amazing. I do think this film does the interpersonal drama better than Blade 2 does. It's an ensemble film in a similar way, but I think it does that more successfully, and it's more of a focus in this film, which is good. The bad guys in this one are Nazis who have gotten a paranormal power of some kind, and this is not the first time you'll find a fascist group as the enemy of these films, so I'm going to keep a counter of that too. And essentially, the reason this is so low is it's a basically play-by-the-numbers origin story that I'm kind of bored of. I imagine this played a lot better in 2004 when the superhero genre hadn't kind of like taken over everything. But for me, it feels a bit played out, and that's not the movie's fault, that's just a me thing. Also, I totally forgot that there was like a regular guy that we follow through a lot of this film until I started putting together clips with the video. And I watched this for the first time earlier this year, so it's not like I watched it a long time ago and totally forgot about that. Anyway, I'm sure he was important to giving people context of the time who these characters were and being kind of like our everyman, like getting us into this weird world type character. But for me, he's completely forgettable. So that's also not great. Anyway, but all the other characters are really fun. Next on my ranking is Nightmare Alley. This one has such a fun cast, including everybody's favorite Ron Perlman, again. Bradley Cooper is great as our lead, Stanton Carlisle. The film is about a carnival worker who does essentially anything and everything to advance his career. It is adapting a novel of the same name, and apparently there's already another film adaptation from 1947 that I haven't seen, so I'm not sure how this compares. I could see this film getting better on rewatch, especially in the cyclical way the film begins and ends. I think all of the pieces here are interesting. It just doesn't all come together for me. But some of the pieces are definitely interesting. I do think Guillermo is a bit too hopeful of a guy to make this sort of character work. I think they're trying for something similar to Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood, but Guillermo is much too kind of a person to kind of make this character seem as bad as they are. Like, not to say that it's not possible, but all of his characters that work the best are the, like, hopeful ones. I just don't think he has enough, cynicism in him to really make this kind of character have the bite that it needs. And so it just kind of doesn't quite work for me, which makes the rest of the movie not great. But in pieces, it's fine. I do think this big budget period production design is gorgeous. I just wish the lead was a little bit more refined or something. I can't quite place it, but it just doesn't work for me, which is unfortunate because he's on screen virtually the whole time. I do like a lot of the side characters. I think they're very fun, but they're not in it very long because he spends so much of the story traveling, and it's kind of split into two parts anyway. This one just didn't quite work for me, but the parts that I liked, like the production design, are really strong here, so that's why this is here. Next on my ranking is Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. And I think this takes everything from the original Hellboy and really puts it all together in this fun film. It leans more into the fantasy elements, and I really think that works here. In this Hellboy film, instead of fighting with Nazis, they are fighting essentially elves who want to create an indefeatable golden army. It's sort of a mishmash of what's to come in Guillermo's filmography. We have a version of death that looks pretty similar to another death creature that shows up in Pinocchio, a romance between a fish man and a beautiful woman, and a short kaiju sequence to round things out. I think all of these things are done better in those films that I will be talking about later, but it is fun to see the seeds of that kind of in this film. We also have some fun bugs here. I guess they are fairies, but sort of bug-like, so I'm going to count them. They're also absolutely terrifying. They're scary bugs, which is even more of a Del Toro thing. I think my favorite scene in the film is when Hellboy, greatly played by Ron Perlman again, and Abe, also greatly played by Doug Jones again, are singing Can't Smile Without You when they're both drunk together. It's really sweet, and I feel like this is the sort of thing we don't really see in big blockbusters like this. Del Toro has this sort of sweetness paired with an interest in the darkness that I really love in this film, and this is a great example of that. It also handles the idea of these creatures being super different from people really well. We see that both in Hellboy and Abe's arc as they try to navigate sort of regular romances concurrently, which culminates in that scene where they're singing together. It's just really sweet, and I think it works really well. Next on my ranking is Cronos. This is Del Toro's first film, and it's a really strong one already. I love how much you can see how much empathy he has for monsters already. Cronos is about a man who stumbles upon a device that can give eternal life. He does this unknowingly, and the device makes his youth return at the cost of a thirst for blood, among other things. I really love how much empathy he has for the main character, Jesus Gris. I haven't ever seen a vampire film quite capture the real horror it would be to transform into something like this. You see it happen in like a scene or two in films, but the slow descent into becoming that is such an interesting story, and Del Toro really lends a lot of care and empathy that I think could have been mishandled if they had just really leaned into the horror of it, but you really just feel for this guy. Federico Lupi is absolutely incredible. This is one of 2 films where he works with kids with Guillermo del Toro. He has such a gentleness about him that makes him such a great scene partner for kids. I really want to see more of his work. He does incredible stuff here, and he's a huge reason this movie works as well as it does. I'm sure some of Guillermo del Toro's direction is helping here, but I have to imagine he's leaning a lot on Lupi and his years of experience at that point. I also did not know Ron Perlman was going to be in this, so it's fun to see how he really is a part of Guillermo del Toro's work from the very beginning. And also seeing him try to speak Spanish was kind of fun. Also, I'm going to add another bug to our bug counter. The mechanism of the device is made of, basically there's a bug inside of it. I'm not 100% sure how that works, but it's cool. Next on my ranking is Crimson Peak. I really like this film. I think it's very much a gothic horror film in the best way. This might be my favorite looking of his horror films. It just is dripping like with this just gorgeousness. It's so visually amazing, and it just is very much a movie for me. As a lot of his films are, but this one especially. Anyway, Crimson Peak is a gothic horror film about a young woman who falls in love with an English baronet, and then she moves out with him and his sister after the mysterious death of her father. In the house, she meets the ghosts that haunt the place. I really, really enjoyed this. I'm definitely the target audience. I love gothic horror films. I think Tom Hiddleston is very handsome, especially in this time. The house is amazing and creepy. All of the costumes are just exquisite. They are some of the best costumes in this entire filmography, I think. I also love our lead. She's such a fun protagonist. She has this intelligence and curiosity that is really hard to nail. This film plays to Guillermo del Toro's strengths in the best way. We have a smart and beautiful heroine, a creepy house. Doug Jones is playing some spooky ghosts. But I like that, I'm going to get into some spoiler territory here. I like that the ghosts are friendly. That's a theme in a lot of Guillermo's filmography. In the other ghost films he does, I don't think they're ever out to get anyone, which I think is interesting, other than people who have wronged them, I guess. But the protagonists are not those people. I also didn't love Jessica Chastain in this movie. I don't know what it was, if it was her accent or I don't know, which is hard because she's the main villain of the film. And so that this film would have been higher on this list if she had been different. I don't know what the deal is. I don't know what didn't work for me. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I love the idea of a complex, evil female villain because you really just don't see that very often. But it just didn't quite work for me, unfortunately. Also, we have another bug. Butterflies and moths are used quite a bit throughout as a visual, thematic device, but also the dog that's at the house is a papillon, and papillon means butterfly in French. I only know this really because I had a papillon growing up and I loved her. So anyway, it was fun that there was a papillon in this movie. That made me very happy. Next on my ranking is Frankenstein, his most recent film. I really, really wanted to like this more than I did, but I do think there's a lot of interesting stuff here. I think it's fun that we actually get the framing device of the ship stuck in the ice at the beginning. That's from the book, and I feel like it often gets skipped in Frankenstein adaptations. I mean, it makes sense. It's a huge set piece, and you could kind of just start the story and skip the framing device, but I'm glad they included it. And it really bookends the story very well. But immediately after that beginning intro, we spend so much time on Victor Frankenstein's childhood, and I just was so not interested in that. It kept making me think of Barry Lyndon for some reason. I think it was because so much of that first part was about 2 sons kind of vying for their father's attention, and there's obviously one that's favorited by the father. But I think it's done so much better in Barry Lyndon, and I just was like, let's move on. I want to get to the creature and the making of the creature. But once we get to that point, I think it does work a lot better. I've read that Guillermo del Toro intended Oscar Isaac to be more of a rock star Victor Frankenstein, but I think that only kind of comes across. It seems like it's more in his costuming than anything else. I don't know what I needed from Oscar Isaac. I just didn't quite buy into his character for some reason, and he's like half the movie. But Jacob Elordi as the creature was absolutely incredible. The way he moves is just so weird, especially in the beginning when he's like figuring out his body. He's also just this absolutely huge person, like really tall person, and they shoot him like he's really tall too, so it emphasizes it. It makes him seem so different from everyone else in the film in such a great way. I really also love the direction they went with his makeup and costuming as well. That coat that he puts on throughout a lot of it is really cool and just makes him seem big and scary. The production design, of course, is always a treat. Mia Goth's costumes were an absolute delight to look at. I would love to wear any of the dresses she wears, even as Frankenstein's mother, which I think is a fun dual casting. Guillermo del Toro likes to do that a lot, which I think is a fun detail here. The ending, I'm not going to say what happened because it's a spoiler. But if you're familiar with the story, you kind of know. I don't think that it was quite earned. And I think that's unfortunate, but I just was like, I don't buy that this is where everybody's at the end, if that makes sense, like emotionally, not physically. I don't really want to say more without spoiling it because I know this movie is only just coming out on streaming when I'm posting this, but I just didn't quite buy it, unfortunately. And I can see if you did how it would be really emotional, and a lot of people have said that it has been for them, but it just didn't quite work for me. But just Jacob Elordi's performance alone in this film is what's placing this movie as high as it is, because he is just absolutely incredible. It is worth watching just for him, 100%. Next on my ranking is The Devil's Backbone, the first of what I'm calling children in peril during a fascist regime. This one also happens to be a ghost story. That's only sort of a side thing compared to the rest of the stuff that's going on in the plot. Basically, the story is about a young boy who gets taken to a boys' orphanage in Spain during the Spanish Civil War, and he gets dropped off. We watch him as he gets to know the orphanage and the other orphans, and the small boy haunting the place. The kid ensemble is absolutely incredible. Like, I cannot overstate at how well cast these kids are. They all talk, think, and act like kids. This is way harder than it sounds. And I think part of that is the script that Del Toro wrote, of course, but also his directing, and then, of course, the casting, which is also a huge part of it. Fernando Tielve as Carlos is absolutely incredible as the lead of this film. And of course, we have our lovely Federico Lupi again working with children. He is also great in this one. I love his role in this one. He's very much just so in love with Carmen, another character, and their story, their romance. I just was so captivated by it. Like, he's like reading poetry in the other room for her to hear. It's a really great, like, side story to everything else going on. There are also prominent slugs in the film, which I guess isn't really a bug, but I'm going to count it for the sake of the list. And this movie does not go where I expected, which I kind of loved. So I recommend this one. It is really heavy, but it's really good. Next on my ranking is Pacific Rim. Is this a bit high on the list? Yes, but it was my first Guillermo del Toro film. It is one of my favorite comfort movies. Like, I can watch this at any moment and immediately feel better the second I start the film. It just connects with me in a way that most movies don't, and I can't really quite put my finger to it, but I will try and explain. It was also my first real introduction to kaiju films. And since then, I have developed a huge love for them. Yes, I started watching Godzilla films as an adult. That's a new thing for me. It has a special place in my heart, and I will always love and adore it. Pacific Rim is a big, bombastic kaiju film where the Earth is at war with kaiju who emerge from the ocean. And to combat this, humanity has created Jaegers, giant robots, to fight them. It's not like incredible storytelling or anything. It's not revolutionary, but I love it so much. I got to see this when it released in IMAX, I'm pretty sure, and it was truly one of the funnest movie experiences I've ever had. It's such a fun film that has some of the best kaiju versus robot fights, at least I've ever seen, and if you have recommendations, please tell me. I want to watch more of this kind of thing. I also love how the kaiju and Jaegers feel. They're often shot from the ground or on the tops of buildings where you could put a real camera. There's so much here that just feels so grounded, but not so grounded that it's boring. The fight in Hong Kong is especially spectacular. It somehow strikes that balance between being beautiful and full of action, but not too much that you lose track of what's happening. I also love the idea of the drift as part of the way that you maneuver a Jaeger. I think that's a really cool idea that adds a lot of interpersonal drama that could have been lacking in a film like this. I think my favorite characters of the film are Charlie Day's character and Bern Gorman's character. They really play off each other in really funny ways. Their subplot with Ron Perlman is very fun, and I just love that whole thing. I think it's a funny, bit of world building that's happening while we're kind of getting the big, grander fight going on at the same time. So anyway, I just love that. And the soundtrack is so good. The score is so fun and really just pumps me up like nothing else. It's so good. Anyway, I adore this movie if you can't tell. I know Guillermo has better films than this, and that's why they're ranked higher, but I absolutely adore this film. Next on my ranking is Pan's Labyrinth. This is the second of Children in Peril During a Fascist Regime films. This is definitely one of the most lauded films of Guillermo del Toro's filmography. It melds fantasy and real peril really well. It definitely feels like an adult fantasy story. It takes place in Spain in 1944. Ophelia and her very pregnant mom move in with her stepfather, who's a captain of the armed police corps and is hunting a group of rebels. While there, Ophelia meets magical creatures who lead her through trials of the labyrinth garden near her house. Or the house. I think the production design and creature design in this film is Guillermo del Toro at his absolute best. It is such an incredible looking film. Not even just the fantasy stuff, but everything looks incredible. And that being said, the fantasy stuff really is amazing. The creature designs are spectacular. Before seeing this film, all I knew was about the fawn and the pale man, and they are all over, just in pictures online and whatever for a reason. They are both performed excellently by Doug Jones, and I can't imagine trying to speak in that fawn getup and also not in a language that you speak natively in. Apparently Jones was the only English speaker of the cast, which must have been really hard considering all the stuff he had going on. Guillermo del Toro, again, seems to work really well with kids, and this film is no exception. Our lead is amazing, and this movie features so much of her, it couldn't be as good as it is without her. She's well written like a kid, which is a huge part of what makes these roles work. Kids are really difficult. And the fantasy of it all is just so wonderful, but also eerie. It's whimsical, but not so whimsical that it's just oh, everything is perfect, whatever. But it's still a little bit scary even. Anyway, that's a hard line to walk, I think. And he does a really good job of it. And there are also bugs in this film. They do end up turning into fairies later, which feels very Guillermo del Toro. Also, I was worried going into this, so I only saw this for the ranking. So this is definitely a recent watch. Anyway, I was worried going into this that the fantasy would sort of dominate the rest of the storytelling because maybe that is all I had seen before. That was not the case at all. And thank goodness, because the actual story of what was going on was super interesting. And of course, I love the fantasy elements too. I don't think this would have worked as well without that. But I do love that they were pretty well balanced as far as dominating the main story. It never felt like, oh, I'm sick of the regular stuff or I'm sick of the fantasy stuff. It felt really pretty well balanced to me. Next on my ranking is Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Yes, it is actually called that because for some reason there were 1 million Pinocchio movies coming out that year. I don't know why that happened, but this is definitely the best one, though I haven't seen the other ones. I just have a feeling.
Father, when can I leave to be on my own? I've got the whole world to see.
The plot is essentially what you'd expect from a Pinocchio film. It takes place in fascist Italy between World War I and II. I think if you're more familiar with the Disney version, the biggest change here is that Geppetto does have a son in this film, and he is killed. He builds a puppet of the wood out of grief after losing his son. And so it's a lot more about him moving on from his son's death and that sort of thing. So that's one of the big changers here. Also, this is Guillermo del Toro's only animated film so far and only musical so far. Both things that I love. I can't imagine this version of the story working as well without either of those things. And both elements are used to great effect. I love how rough the making of Pinocchio is and his introduction is. He's just destroying things, and it really makes him seem more like his own creature. Like, I don't know, it's just really fun. The stop motion is absolutely gorgeous. Mark Gustafsson, who co-directed the film with Del Toro, had worked on films like Fantastic Mr. Fox, and I really think he is a huge reason why this movie feels the way that it does. And unfortunately, he passed away pretty recently after the film was released. But I'm glad that he was able to see this film and see people react to this film, because it really is incredible. I think this is my favorite of the children in peril during a fascist regime films that Del Toro has made. I think mostly because it touched me the most, but I also think it being a musical and being animated really brought the emotions home in an incredible way that live action just can't. Gregory Mann is absolutely amazing as Pinocchio. He does an incredible job of acting, but also singing, which is crazy. He's also really sweet and goes through this incredible journey, and you totally believe it. It's great work. Ian McGregor is a great guide for Pinocchio. He also sings. If you like Ian McGregor singing, this is a fun one to watch. He's also a bug, which we see a lot of in Guillermo's work. David Bradley, who plays Geppetto, is amazing. He's absolutely heartbroken, and he just plays this sadness really well, but also watching him trying to reckon with Pinocchio and figure out what this creature is really is what makes a lot of this movie really interesting and really great. So if his performance didn't work, it wouldn't quite work the same way. And of course, there are other fun characters we meet throughout the film, voiced by Del Toro regulars like Christoph Waltz, plays a ringmaster. Tilda Swinton plays both the ethereal characters, another dual casting here of Death and the Wood Sprite. Kate Blanchett plays a monkey. Ron Perlman plays a fascist government official. And really, this is here because it just affected me so deeply. By the end of it, I was absolutely sobbing, and it just really touched me. But a bit of a fair warning, this one is pretty sad if you haven't seen it already, but it's really great. And last, but certainly not least, is The Shape of Water. Somehow, this ended up being the movie I watched last for this ranking, and it feels like a fitting end for me to cap off Guillermo del Toro's filmography. It's all of his best impulses put into one film, really. Doug Jones and Sally Hawkins are fantastic. I really did buy that they were in love with each other, which is amazing, considering, like, she is mute, and so she can't use her voice at all. And then he also doesn't talk and is in all of this costuming. But I bought it. I really felt that they were in love. And his design is just so cool. And it made the film feel more grounded, which is kind of amazing in this sort of fantastical world. But he does such a great job in that performance. And this movie is also, like, really whimsical, which I really loved. It doesn't feel so sweet that you're overloaded on, like, the sweetness of it, but it's just really fun. It also has that darkness to it. Like, Michael Shannon is such a great villain in this. He's already kind of a weird guy in the film, but he just gets progressively more vicious, I guess, and he's amazing here. Del Toro says that Michael Shannon would have been the hero of the film had it been made in the 1950s, which I think is an interesting idea. And I think that's super cool that he even was thinking about that. And I love Sally Hawkins here. She is absolutely wonderful. That scene where she's expressing how much she cares for the amphibian man, I think is what his title is or whatever. Just her expression is so, I just was sobbing through that whole thing because I was like, she really just feels so seen by him. And oh, it's so good. This movie just is very much for me. It takes all of the things that I really like and puts it kind of in a nice package with a beautiful bow. It's just a beautiful movie too. Like even the underground facility that they're working in is really cool looking, and I love her apartment, and just there's so much about this that just I really resonate with, and so that's why this is my number one. And I just, yeah, I loved and adored this, so that's why it's here. And that's my ranking. I had a really fun time putting this together. It was really fun to watch all of Guillermo del Toro's filmography and finally fill in some blind spots that I've been missing. I had a great time making this, and I really appreciate you making it this far. I highly recommend checking out any of the blind spots you have in Del Toro's filmography, especially if any of these sound interesting to you. I think there's not really a dud among these, even among the lower in the list that I have. He has such a unique style and voice that is really worth exploring if these stories interest you. Thank you again for watching.